Standing in my childhood bedroom on Christmas Eve, I listened to my father's stern voice echoing up the stairs about suspending my senior year at Northwestern until I apologized to my brother Tyler. Mother's disappointed sighs about family unity and making things right drifted through the floorboards. I continued folding my clothes, methodically placing them into boxes with deliberate care. When they finished their ultimatum about cutting off my tuition and removing me from the family, I called down calmly, "All right." The sudden silence from below was deafening. They had no idea what I had just agreed to. 3 weeks earlier, my world had turned upside down in the most calculated way possible. Tyler, my 25-year-old brother, and the family's shining medical school star had shown up at my Northwestern dorm room unannounced. I was deep into my senior thesis research on pharmaceutical patent fraud, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and research papers that represented months of meticulous work. "Wow, Delilah, this looks incredible," Tyler had said, scanning my desk with what I thought was genuine admiration. "Mind if I take a look? I'm working on something similar for my medical ethics class at Chicago Med." I should have known better. Tyler had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. While I struggled for recognition despite my 3.9 GPA and research awards, Tyler's mere existence seemed to validate every dream our parents had ever harbored. He was charming, confident, and destined to join our father's pharmaceutical consulting firm as the medical credibility it desperately needed. That afternoon, I had foolishly shared my research methodology, my contacts in the pharmaceutical industry, and even my preliminary findings about how certain companies manipulated patent applications to extend drug monopolies. Tyler asked thoughtful questions, took notes, and praised my analytical approach. When he asked to photograph a few key documents for his own reference, I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. 2 weeks later, my thesis advisor, Professor Williams, received a troubling phone call from Chicago Medical School. Tyler had submitted a research project that was remarkably similar to mine, claiming he had developed the analysis independently. When the professors compared our work, the similarities were undeniable. However, Tyler had submitted his version first by exactly 3 days. The meeting in Professor Williams's office was a nightmare I still replay in my head. Tyler sat across from me with our parents flanking him, his expression appropriately shocked and hurt. He claimed I had stolen his research after he had shared his ideas with me during a family dinner months earlier. Our parents nodded along, remembering conversations that had never happened. "I trusted my own sister," Tyler said, his voice breaking just enough to sound genuine. "I shared my research ideas with her because I thought she could help me understand the pharmaceutical industry better. I never imagined she would steal my work for her own thesis." Professor Williams looked at me expectantly, waiting for my defense. But what could I say? Tyler had covered every angle. He produced emails to professors at Chicago Med dated months earlier, outlining research ideas that closely matched my work. He had created a paper trail that made me look like the thief. Our father, Robert Caldwell, owned Caldwell Consulting, a firm that advised pharmaceutical companies on regulatory compliance. His business depended heavily on having medical professionals validate his recommendations. Tyler's future medical degree was not just a family achievement, it was a business necessity. Our mother, Patricia, had spent Tyler's entire life building the narrative of his exceptional abilities. Admitting he was capable of academic fraud would have shattered her carefully constructed reality. "Delilah," Professor Williams said gently, "these are serious accusations. If you used your brother's research without proper citation, that constitutes academic misconduct. I need you to explain how this happened." I tried to tell the truth. I explained my research timeline, my sources, my methodology. But Tyler had an answer for everything. He produced a notebook with dates and ideas that supposedly predated my work. He showed photographs of research materials on his phone with timestamps that seemed to support his story. Our parents sat in silence as Professor Williams outlined the potential consequences. Academic misconduct could result in failing my thesis, potential expulsion, and permanent marks on my academic record. My dreams of graduate school, my carefully planned future, everything hung in the balance. "We need to handle this as a family," our father said firmly. "Delilah, you need to withdraw your thesis and apologize to your brother. This has gone too far." That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction with Tyler over the past months. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. His surprise visit to my dorm had not been random. His questions had been too specific, too focused on the exact elements he later claimed as his own. His shocked reaction in Professor Williams's office had been just a little too perfect. I realized Tyler had planned this from the beginning. He had needed research for his medical school applications, particularly for his Johns Hopkins transfer application. My work on pharmaceutical fraud was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that would impress admissions committees. Rather than develop his own ideas, he had decided to steal mine. But Tyler had made one crucial mistake. In his rush to submit his work first, he had included a specific citation error that I had made in my preliminary notes, then corrected weeks later. His version contained the error while my final thesis had the correction. It was a small detail, but it proved I was the original author. Professor Martinez from the chemistry department had been following my research with interest. Unlike my thesis advisor, he was not intimidated by my family's pharmaceutical connections. When I approached him privately about my suspicions, he listened carefully to my evidence. "Delilah," he said, leaning back in his office chair, "I believe you. But proving academic fraud against someone from a prominent family requires more than just timeline discrepancies. You need undeniable proof, and you need allies who cannot be influenced or intimidated." That conversation changed everything. Professor Martinez became my secret ally, helping me understand that fighting Tyler directly would be futile. Instead, I needed to think strategically to build a case that could not be dismissed or covered up by family connections. As Christmas approached and my family's pressure intensified, I began to formulate a plan that would expose not just Tyler's fraud, but the entire system of privilege and deception that had enabled it. Tyler's theft of my research was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that went much deeper than I had initially realized. My investigation into Tyler's academic history began in the Northwestern University library at 2 in the morning, when the building was nearly empty and I could work without interruption. Professor Martinez had given me access to academic databases that most students never knew existed, and what I discovered made my stomach turn. Tyler's academic record was a masterpiece of careful manipulation. His high school valedictorian status had been achieved through what appeared to be strategic plagiarism of published research papers. His science fair project that won state competitions was lifted wholesale from a graduate thesis published years earlier at a small college in Oregon. Even his medical school entrance essay contained paragraphs that matched published articles in medical journals, altered just enough to avoid detection by standard plagiarism software. The pattern was consistent and sophisticated. Tyler never stole from prominent sources or recent publications. He targeted obscure research, older papers, and work from smaller institutions that were less likely to be cross-referenced. He was careful to modify language and reorganize information, creating the appearance of original thought while building his entire academic career on the work of others. Professor Martinez confirmed my suspicions during our clandestine meeting in his office the following week. "Tyler approached me last month." He revealed his expression grim. "He offered me $5,000 for advance access to your research notes and methodology. He claimed he wanted to collaborate with you as a surprise, but something about his demeanor made me uncomfortable." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Tyler had not stumbled across my research by accident. He had been planning to steal it for weeks, possibly months. His visit to my dorm room had been reconnaissance and opportunity to confirm the value of what I was working on before committing to the theft. "I declined his offer, of course," Professor Martinez continued. But I documented the conversation because it struck me as highly unusual. Students do not typically offer professors money for access to other students' work, even siblings. That documentation became crucial evidence in the case I was building. But I needed more than Professor Martinez's testimony. I needed proof of Tyler's history of fraud, and I needed to understand why our parents were so willing to enable his behavior. The answer came from an unexpected source. Sarah, my best friend since childhood, worked part-time in the registrar's office to help pay for college. During one of our regular study sessions, she casually mentioned something that made me pause. "Your brother called the office last week asking about your transcript," she said, not looking up from her textbook. "He claimed your parents needed it for some financial aid application, but the request seemed weird. Why would they need your transcript for his financial aid, RC?" I asked Sarah to check Tyler's academic record, knowing she could access the information through her work-study position. What we found was devastating. Tyler's grades at Chicago Medical School were not as stellar as our parents believed. He was struggling in several core subjects and had received academic warnings for late assignments and poor performance on clinical rotations. More importantly, Tyler had applied for transfer to Johns Hopkins Medical School, one of the most prestigious programs in the country. His application was pending, and it relied heavily on the research project he had stolen from me. If Johns Hopkins discovered the fraud, Tyler's medical career would be over before it began. But our parents knew none of this. They continued to support Tyler financially and emotionally, believing he was excelling in medical school and destined for greatness. Our father's business presentations frequently mentioned Tyler's upcoming medical degree as validation of Caldwell Consulting's expertise. Our mother had already planned a celebration party for Tyler's anticipated Johns Hopkins acceptance. During Thanksgiving dinner, I watched my family dynamics with new clarity. Tyler dominated conversations with stories of his medical school achievements, many of which I now knew were fabricated. Our parents hung on every word, asking detailed questions about his clinical rotations and research projects. When Tyler mentioned his groundbreaking work on pharmaceutical patents, I saw our father's eyes light up with pride and business opportunities. Meanwhile, my own achievements were dismissed or minimized. When I mentioned receiving recognition from the American Chemical Society for my research, our mother changed the subject to Tyler's recent exam scores. When Professor Martinez called during dinner to discuss my potential for graduate school, our father answered the phone and cut the conversation short, saying we were having family time. The favoritism was not subtle, but it was so ingrained that our parents seemed unaware of it. Tyler was the future of the family, the validation of their parenting and social status. I was expected to support and celebrate his success, even when that success was built on stealing my work. As Christmas approached, the pressure to apologize and withdraw my accusations intensified. Tyler began making veiled threats about my future in the family if I continued to cause problems. Our parents scheduled increasingly frequent family meetings where they outlined the consequences of my stubborn refusal to admit wrongdoing. "Your behavior is embarrassing the entire family," our mother said during one particularly tense conversation. "Tyler has worked so hard to build his reputation, and you are trying to destroy it out of jealousy. Think about your future, Delilah," our father added. The pharmaceutical industry is a small community. If you become known as someone who makes false accusations against family members, you will never work in this field. Tyler, on the other hand, will be in a position to help your career if you handle this situation properly. Their words were carefully chosen to sound like advice rather than threats, but the message was clear. Support Tyler's version of events or face academic and professional exile. They were willing to sacrifice my future to protect his, and they expected me to cooperate willingly. But Tyler had made one crucial error in his planning. During one of his threats, he mentioned specific details about my research that I had never shared with him, details that only appeared in my private notes and communications with Professor Martinez. His knowledge of those details proved he had accessed my work far more extensively than he admitted. I began documenting every conversation, saving every email, and building a comprehensive record of Tyler's fraud and our family's complicity. Professor Martinez helped me understand the formal procedures for reporting academic misconduct, not just at Northwestern and Chicago Medical School, but at Johns Hopkins and with professional medical associations. The plan that emerged was both simple and devastating. Rather than continuing to fight Tyler's accusations directly, I would expose his entire pattern of fraud to every institution that mattered. His medical school career, his Hopkins application, and his future in the pharmaceutical industry would all be destroyed simultaneously. But timing was everything. I needed Tyler to feel confident in his victory before revealing the evidence that would destroy him. Christmas Eve, with our entire family gathered and expectations high, would be the perfect moment for the truth to emerge. While my family assumed I was wallowing in defeat, I was actually executing a plan that had been months in the making. Georgetown University's accelerated PhD program in bioethics had been my secret backup plan since junior year, but Tyler's theft of my research had transformed it into something much more significant. The program was perfect for my needs. Prestigious, focused on pharmaceutical industry ethics, and completely separate from my father's professional network. More importantly, Georgetown's bioethics department was led by Professor Chen, a renowned expert in academic integrity who had built her career exposing fraud in medical research. I had first contacted Professor Chen 6 months earlier after reading her groundbreaking paper on plagiarism in medical school applications. Her research documented systematic fraud at major universities, showing how privileged students used family connections and financial resources to steal the work of less connected peers. When I explained my own research on pharmaceutical patent manipulation, she immediately recognized its value and potential impact. Your work could be the foundation for a comprehensive study on academic fraud in medical education, Professor Chen had explained during our first video call. But to be effective, it needs to be part of a larger investigation that documents patterns of behavior across multiple institutions. Over the following months, while Tyler was planning to steal my research, I was actually expanding it under Professor Chen's guidance. My investigation into pharmaceutical patent fraud became a case study in how academic misconduct enables corporate corruption. Tyler's theft of my work was not just plagiarism, it was evidence of how privileged students exploit the system to gain credentials they had not earned. Professor Chen helped me understand that exposing Tyler's fraud required more than just academic discipline. It required demonstrating the broader implications of allowing unqualified individuals to enter the medical profession through fraudulent means. My research became a weapon against systemic corruption, with Tyler serving as a perfect example of the problem. The Georgetown application process had been deliberately secretive. I could not risk my family discovering my plans before I was ready to execute them. Professor Chen arranged for me to submit my application materials through her department using my Northwestern email address and Professor Martinez as a reference. The application included my original research documented evidence of Tyler's plagiarism and a comprehensive analysis of how academic fraud undermines medical education. Georgetown's response was enthusiastic and immediate. The admissions committee recognized that my research addressed critical issues in medical ethics and professional integrity. They offered me a full scholarship research funding and the opportunity to work directly with Professor Chen on expanding my investigation into a book-length study. But Georgetown was only part of my strategy. Professor Chen had connections with academic integrity offices at major universities across the country, including Johns Hopkins. She helped me understand the proper procedures for reporting academic misconduct, and she agreed to serve as my advocate if Tyler's family tried to use their influence to suppress the investigation. The evidence package I prepared was comprehensive and devastating. It included side-by-side comparisons of Tyler's work and my original research timestamp documentation proving I had developed the ideas, first witness statements from Professor Martinez about Tyler's bribery attempt and analysis of Tyler's pattern of plagiarism throughout his academic career. Professor Chen reviewed every detail of the package, ensuring it met the highest standards of academic rigor. "This is not just about your brother," she explained. "This is about establishing precedent for how institutions handle academic fraud when it involves privileged families. Your case could change how universities investigate and prosecute plagiarism." The Johns Hopkins component was particularly important because Tyler's application was still pending. If the admissions committee discovered his fraudulent research before making their final decision, he would not just be denied admission, he would be blacklisted from medical schools nationwide. The damage to his career would be permanent and irreversible. As Christmas approached, I finalized the details of my plan with Professor Chen and Professor Martinez. The evidence packages would be sent simultaneously to Chicago Medical School, Johns Hopkins, Northwestern University, Georgetown University, and the American Medical Association. The coordination was essential because Tyler's family connections might allow them to suppress investigations at individual institutions, but they could not control all of them simultaneously. Professor Martinez agreed to provide official statements supporting my research and confirming Tyler's attempted bribery. Professor Chen would submit the findings to the Journal of Medical Ethics for peer review and publication, ensuring the case became part of the permanent academic record. Georgetown's legal department stood ready to protect my academic rights if my family attempted retaliation. The timing was carefully orchestrated. The evidence packages would be sent on Christmas Eve after business hours, ensuring they would not be reviewed until Christmas Day at the earliest. By the time Tyler and my parents realized what had happened, the investigations would already be underway at multiple institutions. Meanwhile, my Georgetown transfer was already approved and waiting for my acceptance. Professor Chen had arranged for me to begin classes in January, giving me a fresh start away from my family's influence. My undergraduate degree from Northwestern would transfer seamlessly, and I would graduate with a PhD in bioethics within 3 years. The financial aspects were also carefully planned. Georgetown's scholarship covered full tuition and provided a living stipend, making me financially independent from my parents. Professor Chen had arranged for me to work as a research assistant on a federal grant studying academic integrity, providing additional income and valuable professional experience. On December 23rd, I received final confirmation from Georgetown that all systems were in place. Professor Chen called to review the evidence package one last time and coordinate the submission schedule. Professor Martinez confirmed he had prepared his official statements and was ready to submit them through Northwestern's Academic Integrity Office. "Are you prepared for the consequences?" Professor Chen asked during our final planning call. "Once we submit this evidence, there will be no going back. Your family relationships may never recover." I looked around my childhood bedroom decorated with awards and achievements that my parents had never properly acknowledged. Tyler's medical school acceptance letters were prominently displayed on the family room wall, while my academic honors were relegated to a small shelf in my bedroom. The favoritism and manipulation had been going on for years. I was just finally in a position to expose it. "Professor Chen," I replied, "my family relationships were damaged long before I discovered Tyler's fraud. At least this way the truth will finally come out." Christmas Eve arrived with unusual tension in the Caldwell household. Tyler seemed nervous, frequently checking his phone and asking subtle questions about my thesis progress. Our parents maintained their usual facade of holiday cheer, but they watched me carefully for signs of capitulation. As I packed my belongings with methodical precision, I felt a sense of calm that had been absent for weeks. Every item I folded and placed in boxes represented a step toward freedom from a family system that had never valued my authentic achievements. By morning, my room would be empty and my transfer to Georgetown would be complete. Tyler had no idea that his question about what I had sent would reveal the scope of his own destruction. The Christmas Eve family dinner was a masterpiece of false normalcy. Our mother had prepared Tyler's favorite dishes, and our father had opened a bottle of expensive wine to celebrate what they assumed would be my surrender. The dining room table was set with our grandmother's china as if the formal presentation could somehow elevate the coercion they had planned. Tyler arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a bouquet of flowers for our mother and wearing the confident smile of someone who believed he had won. He hugged me warmly as if the past month of accusations and family turmoil had been nothing more than a minor misunderstanding between siblings. "I'm really glad we can put this behind us, Delilah," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of magnanimous forgiveness. "Family is more important than any academic disagreement." Our parents beamed with approval as Tyler took his seat at the head of the table, the position traditionally reserved for the guest of honor. I sat quietly in my usual spot, responding to conversation with polite but minimal contributions. They interpreted my subdued demeanor as acceptance of defeat, exactly as I had intended. During the appetizer course, our father launched into a speech about family loyalty and the importance of supporting each other's success. He spoke about Tyler's bright future in medicine and the opportunities that awaited him at prestigious institutions. He mentioned the pharmaceutical industry connections that would benefit Tyler's career and, by extension, the entire family's financial security. "We have always been a family that handles our problems internally," our father declared, raising his wine glass in a toast. "When we face challenges, we come together and find solutions that benefit everyone. Tonight, we are celebrating that tradition." Tyler accepted the praise gracefully, making humble comments about his good fortune and expressing gratitude for our parents' support. He spoke about his Hopkins application with carefully modulated excitement, as if he was trying not to appear overconfident about his chances for admission. "The admissions committee has been very encouraging," he said, cutting his steak with precise movements. "They were particularly impressed with my research on pharmaceutical patents. They said it demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking they look for in their students." I nodded politely, using every ounce of self-control to maintain my composure. Tyler was describing my research as if he had developed every insight himself. He elaborated on methodology I had created, cited sources I had discovered, and outlined conclusions I had reached through months of careful analysis. Our parents listened with rapt attention, asking detailed questions that allowed Tyler to demonstrate his supposed expertise. As Tyler spoke, I discreetly checked my phone under the table. The evidence packages had been scheduled for delivery at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Central, and 10 o'clock Pacific, ensuring they reached all target institutions simultaneously. The first confirmation messages began arriving during dessert. Message delivered Johns Hopkins University Office of Academic Integrity. Message delivered Chicago Medical School Dean's Office. Message delivered American Medical Association Ethics Committee. Message delivered Northwestern University Academic Standards Office. Each notification sent a small thrill through my chest, but I maintained my neutral expression and continued eating my apple pie. Tyler continued his performance, discussing his clinical rotations and expressing excitement about his upcoming graduation from medical school. "The attending physicians have been very complimentary about my research abilities," Tyler said, accepting our father's praise with practiced humility. "They've mentioned that original thinking is what sets exceptional medical students apart from the merely competent ones." Our mother glowed with maternal pride as Tyler described his academic achievements. She had spent years building the narrative of his exceptional abilities, and his success validated every sacrifice she believed she had made for his education. Her questions about his research demonstrated genuine interest and maternal investment in his future. As the evening progressed, the pressure for my apology intensified gradually. Our parents began making subtle references to the importance of acknowledging mistakes and moving forward as a family. Tyler joined the campaign with gentle encouragement, positioning himself as the wounded party who was nevertheless willing to forgive. "I understand that academic pressure can make people do things they would not normally consider," Tyler said, his tone carefully calibrated to sound compassionate rather than condescending. "Medical school is incredibly stressful, And I know that my success might have created some feelings of competition or inadequacy, but we are family, and family means supporting each other rather than tearing each other down. The manipulation was expert and infuriating. Tyler was reframing his theft of my research as evidence of my psychological problems while positioning himself as the mature, forgiving brother who was willing to overlook my supposed mental health issues. Our parents nodded approvingly at his display of wisdom and emotional intelligence. By 9 o'clock, the subtle pressure had evolved into direct demands. Our father outlined the consequences of my continued refusal to apologize: immediate suspension of tuition payments, removal from the family will, and permanent damage to my reputation in the pharmaceutical industry. Our mother added emotional appeals about family unity and the shame my accusations were bringing to the Caldwell name. "You have until midnight to make this right," our father declared, his voice carrying the authority of a business executive accustomed to compliance. "If you apologize sincerely to Tyler and withdraw your accusations publicly, we can move forward as a family. If you continue this destructive behavior, you will face the consequences alone." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler leaned back in his chair, studying my face for signs of capitulation. Our parents watched expectantly, confident that financial pressure and social isolation would force my surrender. I looked around the table at my family, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Tyler, the golden child who had built his entire identity on stolen achievements. Our father, who prioritized business connections over truth and integrity. Our mother, who enabled dishonesty because it supported her preferred narrative about her son's exceptional abilities. "All right," I said simply, my voice calm and steady. The relief in the room was immediate and palpable. Tyler's shoulders relaxed and he smiled warmly across the table. Our parents exchanged satisfied glances, believing they had successfully resolved the crisis through superior parental authority. Our mother began planning the family meeting, where I would formally apologize and restore harmony to the household. "I am so proud of you for making the mature choice," our father said, refilling his wine glass in celebration. "Tomorrow, we will draft a statement that withdraws your accusations and acknowledges your error in judgment. Tyler's reputation will be fully restored, and we can focus on celebrating his achievements." Tyler stood up and walked around the table to embrace me, his gesture designed to demonstrate his magnanimous forgiveness. "Thank you, Delilah," he whispered in my ear. "You have made the right decision for everyone." I hugged him back, knowing it would be the last time I would ever pretend to accept his manipulation. As Tyler returned to his seat, I excused myself to use the bathroom, ostensibly to compose myself after the emotional evening. In the privacy of the upstairs bathroom, I checked my phone for final confirmation messages. Every evidence package had been delivered successfully. Academic integrity offices at major universities across the country now had comprehensive documentation of Tyler's fraud, along with supporting materials that established a clear pattern of misconduct. Professor Chen had sent a brief message: "All packages delivered. Institutions will review materials during holiday break. Expect responses by December 26th. Georgetown transfer confirmed for January 2nd. Well done." When I returned to the dining room, my family was toasting their victory with champagne our father had retrieved from his private collection. Tyler proposed a toast to family loyalty, while our parents congratulated themselves on handling the crisis with wisdom and firmness. "To the Caldwell family," Tyler declared, raising his glass high. "May we always support each other and celebrate our shared success." I raised my glass and smiled, knowing that by morning, Tyler's definition of success would be permanently altered. The investigation that would destroy his career was already in motion, triggered by evidence packages that painted him as exactly the kind of fraudulent medical student that institutions were desperately trying to identify and eliminate. As I headed upstairs to finish packing, our mother called after me cheerfully. Do not forget to set your alarm, dear. We want to draft your apology statement first thing in the morning so we can submit it to Northwestern before the holiday break ends. I smiled and nodded, continuing up the stairs without responding. By morning, Tyler would discover that my apology was the least of his concerns. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of crisp December air that made everything seem clean and full of possibility. I woke at 6:30 precisely when I had planned and began the final phase of packing my belongings. My room looked almost empty now, with only essential items remaining to be loaded into the car that Professor Chen had arranged to pick me up at 10 o'clock. Downstairs, I could hear our family beginning their traditional Christmas morning routine. Tyler always arrived early to join our parents for coffee and pastries before the formal gift exchange. This year, however, his morning would be interrupted by emails that would change his life forever. At exactly 7:15, I heard Tyler's car in the driveway. He entered the house with his usual cheerful energy, calling out holiday greetings to our parents and expressing excitement about the family meeting where I would formally apologize. His voice carried none of the anxiety that would soon consume him. I continued packing methodically, listening to the comfortable conversation from the kitchen as my family discussed their plans for the day. Our mother was preparing Tyler's favorite breakfast, while our father read portions of the newspaper aloud and commented on pharmaceutical industry news that might interest his future medical professional son. At exactly 8:30, Tyler's phone buzzed with an urgent notification. The first email had arrived from Johns Hopkins University Office of Academic Integrity, marked as high priority and requiring immediate attention. I heard the cheerful conversation pause as Tyler presumably checked his messages. "Everything okay, honey?" Our mother asked, her voice carrying the slight concern that any parent feels when their child's mood shifts unexpectedly. "Just some administrative stuff from Hopkins," Tyler replied, but his tone had changed subtly. "Nothing important." But as Tyler read the email, I knew his casual dismissal was hiding growing panic. The message was formal and direct. "Dear Mr. Caldwell, our office has received credible allegations of academic misconduct relating to research submitted with your transfer application. Please contact our office immediately to schedule a formal interview regarding these allegations. Until this matter is resolved, your application status is under review and your admission prospects are suspended." Tyler's phone continued buzzing as similar messages arrived from Chicago Medical School, Northwestern University, and the American Medical Association. Each email contained the same devastating news. Comprehensive evidence of academic fraud had been submitted, and formal investigations were beginning immediately. I heard footsteps on the stairs as Tyler climbed toward the second floor, presumably to contact the institutions privately and attempt damage control. His bedroom door closed firmly, and I could hear him making urgent phone calls to numbers that would either be busy or redirect him to voicemail systems that would not be monitored until after the holiday. 20 minutes later, Tyler appeared in my doorway, his face pale and his usual confident demeanor completely absent. He was holding his phone in a trembling hand, and his carefully styled hair was disheveled from running his fingers through it repeatedly. "Please tell me you did not send it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up from folding the last of my sweaters, meeting his eyes with the calm expression I had been practicing for weeks. "Send what?" Tyler stepped into my room, closing the door behind him and leaning against it as if he could somehow prevent our parents from discovering the crisis that was unfolding. His hands were shaking visibly now, and sweat was forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "The evidence," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "The plagiarism accusations, the investigation materials. Please tell me you did not actually submit them to Johns Hopkins and Chicago Med." I resumed packing, maintaining my neutral expression while internally celebrating the confirmation that every package had reached its target. Tyler's panic was immediate proof that the evidence was as damaging as Professor Chen and I had intended. "Tyler," I said calmly, "I told you and our parents last night that I would handle this situation appropriately. Did you think I was lying?" "Handle it by apologizing," Tyler said desperately, stepping closer to my bed where I was organizing my final belongings. Handle it by admitting you made a mistake and withdrawing the accusations, not by destroying my entire career. Tyler began pacing my small bedroom, his phone buzzing continuously with new emails and missed calls from academic administrators who were working through the holiday to address what they clearly viewed as a serious academic integrity crisis. "How many institutions did you contact?" Tyler demanded, his voice rising despite his obvious attempt to remain quiet. "Hopkins and Chicago Med are investigating, but what about the AMA? What about Northwestern, please? Tell me you did not send evidence to every medical organization in the country." I sat down on my bed, looking directly at Tyler with the kind of steady gaze that I had never been able to maintain during our childhood conflicts. Years of being dismissed and overshadowed had taught me to avoid direct confrontation, but this moment required absolute clarity. "Tyler," I said quietly, "you stole months of my research, submitted it as your own work, and then convinced our parents to pressure me into accepting blame for your fraud. Did you really think I would just apologize and allow you to build your medical career on stolen work?" Tyler stopped pacing and stared at me, seemingly unable to process that his little sister had outmaneuvered him so completely. His entire adult identity was built on the assumption of his intellectual superiority and strategic thinking. The possibility that I might be capable of systematic long-term planning had never occurred to him. "I can fix this," Tyler said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through contact lists. "I have connections in the medical community. Dean Richardson at Chicago Med knows our father personally. The Hopkins Admissions Committee can be convinced that this is just sibling rivalry gone too far." But as Tyler made his desperate phone calls, he encountered only voicemail systems and automated responses. Christmas Day was not a business day, and academic integrity investigations were not the kind of crisis that could be resolved through family connections and personal influence. I watched Tyler's growing desperation with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. Despite everything he had done to me, Tyler was still my brother, but his panic was entirely focused on protecting his own reputation and career prospects. He showed no remorse for stealing my work, no acknowledgement that his actions had been wrong, and no concern for the damage he had attempted to inflict on my academic future. Downstairs, I could hear our parents discussing our absence from the traditional Christmas morning routine. Their voices carried notes of concern as they wondered why both of their children had disappeared during what was supposed to be a celebration of family unity and Tyler's academic success. "I need you to call these institutions and tell them you made everything up," Tyler said, turning to face me with an expression that combined desperation with the kind of entitled demanding that had characterized his entire relationship with me. "Tell them you were jealous of my success and fabricated evidence out of spite. I will help you craft a statement that makes it clear this was all a misunderstanding." I stood up and walked to my bedroom window, looking out at the suburban street where I had grown up believing that family meant unconditional love and support. The Christmas decorations on neighboring houses looked cheerful and welcoming, representing families that presumably valued honesty and fairness in ways that mine never had. "Tyler," I said without turning around, "the evidence I submitted includes timestamps proving I developed the research, first witness statements about your attempted bribery of Professor Martinez, and documentation of your pattern of plagiarism throughout your academic career. Calling it fabricated would be perjury, and I am not willing to commit crimes to protect your reputation." Tyler's phone rang, and he answered it with obvious hope that someone in authority was finally responding to his crisis. But the conversation was brief and one-sided, consisting mainly of Tyler listening while someone delivered news that made his face turn even paler. "Thank you for calling me back," Tyler said when the call ended. "Dean Richardson's assistant says the investigation is being handled by the university's legal department and no personal interventions will be considered until the formal review process is complete." The finality in his voice told me that Tyler was beginning to understand the scope of his situation. Academic integrity investigations at major universities were not casual inquiries that could be dismissed through personal charm or family influence. They were formal legal processes with serious consequences that could permanently destroy professional careers. Tyler sat down heavily in my desk chair, staring at his phone as more emails and missed calls accumulated. His shoulders sagged with the weight of realizing that his carefully constructed academic identity was crumbling in real time. "Delilah," he said quietly, "our parents are going to blame you for this. They are going to say you destroyed the family out of jealousy and spite. Is your revenge really worth losing your relationship with them forever?" I turned away from the window to face Tyler, directly knowing this might be the last honest conversation we would ever have. His question revealed that he still did not understand the fundamental nature of what he had done to me and what our parents had enabled through their favoritism. "Tyler," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion I was feeling. "My relationship with our parents was damaged long before I discovered your fraud. They were willing to sacrifice my academic future to protect your reputation even when they suspected you might be lying. That is not love or family loyalty. That is enabling corruption." Tyler opened his mouth to respond, but our father's voice from downstairs interrupted him. "Tyler, Delilah, come down here immediately. We need to discuss something important." The tone carried the kind of parental authority that demanded immediate compliance. As Tyler and I headed downstairs, I knew our father had discovered something that would change the family dynamic permanently. Our father stood in the center of the family room, holding his laptop with an expression of controlled fury that I had never seen before. Our mother sat on the sofa, her face pale and confused, clutching a coffee mug with hands that trembled slightly. The cheerful Christmas morning atmosphere had been completely replaced by a tension that felt almost dangerous. "Sit down," our father commanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority he typically reserved for difficult business negotiations. "Both of you." Tyler took a seat in his usual armchair, his phone still buzzing with notifications that he now ignored completely. I sat across from him on the sofa next to our mother, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served me well throughout this crisis. Our father turned the laptop screen toward us, revealing an email that made Tyler's face lose what little color it had retained. The message was from the Johns Hopkins University Legal Department, copied to Chicago Medical School and Northwestern University, with a subject line that read, "Urgent Academic Fraud Investigation, Federal Agencies Notified." "Tyler knew," our father said slowly, his voice deadly quiet. "Would you like to explain why 3 major universities and the American Medical Association are investigating you for academic misconduct, and why the FBI Educational Fraud Task Force has been contacted about potential federal crimes?" The silence in the room was absolute. Tyler stared at the laptop screen as if he could somehow make the words disappear through sheer force of will. Our mother looked back and forth between Tyler and our father, clearly trying to understand how her perfect son could suddenly be facing criminal investigation. "There has been a misunderstanding," Tyler began, his voice weak and unconvincing. "Delilah submitted false accusations because she was jealous of my success. I can provide documentation proving that her claims are fabricated." But our father was no longer listening to Tyler's explanations. His attention had shifted to me, and his expression carried a mixture of suspicion and dawning realization that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Delilah," our father said, "the email mentions comprehensive evidence packages submitted to multiple institutions simultaneously. It describes a coordinated investigation involving Georgetown University's Department of Bioethics. When exactly did you develop the capability to execute something this sophisticated?" I met our father's gaze steadily, knowing that this moment would determine whether I maintained my strategic advantage or allowed myself to be intimidated back into submission. "I have been working with Professor Chen at Georgetown for 6 months, I said calmly. My research on pharmaceutical patent fraud caught her attention because it documented systemic corruption in the industry. When Tyler stole my work, it became evidence in a larger investigation into academic fraud in medical education. Our father's expression darkened as he processed the implications of my statement. His business depended on maintaining credibility with pharmaceutical companies, and academic fraud investigations could destroy those relationships permanently. You contacted Georgetown without discussing it with your family. Our mother asked, her voice carrying a note of betrayal that would have hurt me months earlier. You planned this entire situation without considering the damage it could cause to Tyler's future. I documented Tyler's pattern of plagiarism throughout his academic career, I replied. His theft of my research was not an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic fraud that makes him unqualified to practice medicine. Tyler finally found his voice, though it cracked with desperation as he spoke. She is lying about the pattern of plagiarism. She fabricated evidence to make her accusations seem more credible. This is exactly the kind of vindictive behavior that proves she cannot be trusted. But our father was already searching through additional emails on his laptop, and what he found made his face turn ashen. Tyler, he said quietly, Chicago Medical School is requesting documentation of all research you have submitted since enrollment. Johns Hopkins wants copies of every academic paper you have written since high school. The American Medical Association is conducting a formal investigation into potential professional misconduct. As our father read through the emails, his expression shifted from anger to something approaching panic. They are also requesting information about Caldwell Consulting's use of your research and client presentations. They want to know whether our business has been representing fraudulent medical credentials to pharmaceutical companies. The revelation hit the room like an explosion. Our mother gasped audibly as she realized that the investigation threatened not just Tyler's medical career, but our father's business empire. I watched our family's carefully constructed world of privilege and success begin to crumble in real time. The regulatory compliance presentations we gave to Johnson Pharmaceuticals and Merck were based on Tyler's research credentials. Our father continued, his voice hollow with realization. If his work is plagiarized, then our company provided false information to major clients. We could face lawsuits, criminal charges, and complete business failure. Tyler buried his face in his hands, finally understanding that his academic fraud had consequences far beyond his personal career prospects. Our father's pharmaceutical consulting business employed 12 people and generated millions of dollars in annual revenue. The scandal would destroy not just Tyler and our father, but innocent employees who had trusted the integrity of the work they were doing. Our mother turned to me with an expression of desperate pleading. Delilah, surely you can contact these institutions and explain that this was all a misunderstanding. Tell them that you and Tyler had a sibling disagreement that got out of hand. You can save Tyler's career and protect our family business. I looked at our mother with genuine sadness, understanding that she still did not grasp the fundamental nature of what Tyler had done or why it could not be covered up or minimized. Mom, I said gently, Tyler committed academic fraud. He stole months of my research, submitted it as his own work, and built his medical school applications on plagiarized material. The evidence is documented and irrefutable. No amount of family influence can change those facts. Our father closed the laptop and stared at Tyler with an expression of profound disappointment. How long has this been going on? He demanded. How many times have you submitted plagiarized work? How much of your academic record is fraudulent? Tyler looked up from his hands, his face streaked with tears that I had never seen him cry before. It started in high school, he admitted. The science fair project that got me into Northwestern was based on published research, but I modified it enough that no one noticed. It was just supposed to be a one-time thing to help me get into a good college. But it continued in college. Our father pressed his voice, carrying the kind of prosecutorial intensity he used when investigating business fraud for his clients. Some of my papers used ideas from published sources, Tyler said defensively. But I always changed the language and added my own analysis. It was not complete plagiarism. And medical school? Our mother asked, her voice barely audible. Tyler's silence was answer enough. Our father turned to stare out the window at the suburban street where we had all grown up believing in the importance of hard work, integrity, and honest achievement. The irony was crushing. 25 years of building this business, our father said quietly. 25 years of establishing credibility with major pharmaceutical companies, destroyed because my son is a fraud and I was too proud to see it. I felt a complex mixture of emotions watching my family confront the truth they had refused to acknowledge for years. There was satisfaction in seeing justice finally served, but also genuine sadness for the pain that Tyler's choices had caused everyone involved. There is more, I said, knowing that complete honesty was the only path forward. The investigation will also examine how family connections were used to cover up Tyler's academic problems. Universities are required to report suspected patterns of institutional fraud to federal agencies. Our father looked at me sharply. What kind of institutional fraud? The kind where wealthy families use donations, business relationships, and personal connections to protect students who should be expelled for academic misconduct, I replied. Georgetown's investigation documented how Tyler's problems were overlooked or minimized because of our family's influence. Tyler stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger that replaced his earlier desperation. You have destroyed everything, he said, pointing at me accusingly. Our family, our business, my entire future. Was your revenge really worth all of this destruction? I stood up to face Tyler, directly feeling calm and certain in a way that I had never experienced during our childhood conflicts. Tyler, I said clearly, I did not destroy anything. You destroyed your own future by choosing to build it on stolen work. You destroyed our family by manipulating them into enabling your fraud. You destroyed our father's business by involving it in your academic misconduct. I simply documented the truth and reported it to the appropriate authorities. Tyler stared at me in shock, seemingly unable to believe that his little sister was capable of holding him accountable for his actions. Our parents watched silently as the power dynamic that had defined our family for decades shifted permanently. The car from Georgetown will be here in 30 minutes, I said, looking around the room at my family. I am transferring there to complete my PhD in bioethics. My research on academic fraud will be published in the Journal of Medical Ethics, and I will be working with federal agencies to improve detection of plagiarism in medical education. I headed toward the stairs to collect my final belongings, but our father's voice stopped me. Delilah, he said, his tone carrying a note of grudging respect that I had never heard from him before. How long have you been planning this? I turned back to face him, understanding that this might be the last honest conversation I would ever have with my father. Since the day Tyler first lied to you about stealing my research and you chose to believe him instead of investigating the truth, I replied. I realized then that our family values appearance over integrity, and I decided to align myself with institutions that prioritize honesty over convenience. As I climbed the stairs to finish packing, I heard Tyler making frantic phone calls to lawyers and academic administrators who would not be able to help him escape the consequences of his choices. Our father was already calculating the business damage and planning damage control strategies that would prove inadequate. Our mother was crying quietly, finally understanding that her golden child was not the person she had believed him to be. At 10 o'clock, precisely, Professor Chen's car pulled into our driveway. I loaded my belongings into the trunk and said goodbye to my childhood home, knowing that I would probably never live there again. As we drove away, I saw Tyler standing at the window watching me leave with an expression of disbelief and loss. The next phase of my life was beginning, and it would be built on truth, integrity, and genuine achievement rather than family connections and stolen work. 6 months after that Christmas morning confrontation, I stood in the lecture hall at Georgetown University preparing to present my research on academic fraud to an audience that included federal investigators, university administrators, and medical ethics experts from across the country. The paper that had begun as my Northwestern senior thesis had evolved into a comprehensive study that was reshaping how institutions detect and prosecute academic misconduct. Tyler's medical career had ended exactly as I had predicted. Johns Hopkins not only denied his transfer application but shared their findings with medical schools nationwide, ensuring he would never be admitted to another program. Chicago Medical School expelled him formally, and the Illinois Board of Medical Examiners placed his name on a permanent watch list that would prevent him from obtaining medical licensing in any state. The ripple effects extended far beyond Tyler's personal consequences. The American Medical Association published their investigation findings as a case study in how privileged families exploit institutional weaknesses to protect fraudulent students. 3 major universities revised their academic integrity procedures based on evidence from Tyler's case, implementing new systems designed to detect patterns of plagiarism across multiple institutions. Our father's business faced the kind of comprehensive destruction that I had anticipated but not necessarily desired. Caldwell Consulting lost every major client within 2 months of the fraud becoming public knowledge. The pharmaceutical companies that had relied on Tyler's supposed expertise filed lawsuits alleging misrepresentation and breach of contract. Our father was forced to declare bankruptcy and faced federal charges for using fraudulent academic credentials in business presentations to major corporations. But the most significant transformation was not in the careers that were destroyed, but in the relationships that were rebuilt from a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. Our mother had been the first to reach out 3 months after my departure for Georgetown. Her initial phone call was tentative and filled with the kind of genuine remorse that I had never heard from her before. "Delilah," she had said, her voice shaky with emotion, "I need to apologize for enabling Tyler's behavior and ignoring your achievements for so many years. I was so invested in his success that I lost sight of what was right and wrong. I failed you as a mother, and I failed our family by prioritizing appearance over integrity." That conversation led to weekly phone calls that gradually rebuilt our relationship on an entirely new basis. Our mother began therapy to address the patterns of favoritism that had damaged our family, and she started recognizing my accomplishments in ways that felt genuine rather than obligatory. When my research paper was accepted for publication in the Journal of Medical Ethics, she called to express pride that seemed authentic and well-informed. Tyler's transformation was more complicated, but ultimately more meaningful. His initial response to the consequences had been anger and denial, but as months passed and the full scope of his situation became undeniable, he began engaging in genuine self-reflection for the first time in his adult life. He wrote me a letter in April that I still read when I need to remember that people can change if they are willing to confront their mistakes honestly. "Dear Delilah," the letter began, "I have spent the past 4 months trying to understand how I became someone capable of stealing your work and manipulating our family to cover up my fraud. I realize now that I had been cheating in small ways for so long that major academic misconduct seemed like a natural progression rather than a serious crime." The letter continued for 3 pages, documenting Tyler's recognition of how his entitled behavior had harmed not just me, but everyone who had trusted his false credentials. He described his plans to rebuild his life through legitimate work, starting with a job at a medical equipment company where his supervisors knew his full history and were willing to give him a chance to demonstrate genuine change. "I know that apologizing cannot undo the damage I caused to your academic career and our family relationships," Tyler wrote, "but I want you to know that your courage in exposing my fraud probably saved me from a lifetime of escalating dishonesty that would have eventually destroyed me completely. You gave me an opportunity to become an honest person even though it cost me everything I thought I wanted." Our father's response to the crisis was characteristically focused on practical recovery rather than emotional processing. He spent 6 months working with federal investigators to document the full scope of how Tyler's fraudulent credentials had been used in business presentations. His cooperation with the investigation reduced his criminal penalties, but his reputation in the pharmaceutical industry was permanently destroyed. However, our father's business skills remained valuable, and he eventually found work with a nonprofit organization that investigates corporate fraud in the healthcare industry. The irony was not lost on any of us that he was now working to expose the kind of misconduct he had previously enabled. But the work seemed to give him purpose, and his phone calls to me carried notes of genuine pride in pursuing justice rather than profit. The most unexpected development was our father's growing respect for my academic achievements. During one conversation in May, he said something that I had waited my entire life to hear. "Delilah," he said, "watching you execute that investigation taught me that you inherited the best parts of my analytical abilities while avoiding the ethical compromises that I made in business. Your work is making a real difference in protecting academic integrity, and I am proud of the person you have become." Professor Chen became not just my advisor, but a genuine mentor who helped me understand that my experience with family fraud was part of a much larger pattern of institutional corruption. Working with her expanded my research beyond individual cases of plagiarism to examine how privilege and family connections systematically undermine academic integrity. My relationship with Professor Martinez also deepened into a professional collaboration that extended beyond Georgetown. He visited campus regularly to work on joint research projects, and his support during the investigation had been instrumental in establishing my credibility with federal agencies. But perhaps the most personally meaningful development was my growing relationship with David, a fellow PhD student in Georgetown's bioethics program who specialized in healthcare policy research. David had been working on issues related to medical school admissions when Tyler's case became public, and he had followed the investigation with professional interest that gradually evolved into personal attraction. David understood the complexity of exposing family fraud because his own research documented how wealthy families manipulated medical school admissions through donations and personal connections. Our shared commitment to academic integrity created a foundation for relationship that felt fundamentally different from any romantic connection I had experienced before. As I concluded my presentation to the conference audience, I looked out at the faces of people who were dedicating their careers to protecting institutional integrity. The work that had begun as my senior thesis had evolved into a calling that connected my personal experience with broader social justice issues. During the question and answer session, a medical school dean asked about the personal costs of exposing family fraud. "The decision to report academic misconduct within your own family required enormous courage," she said. "What advice would you give to other students who discover similar problems but fear the consequences of speaking out?" I considered the question carefully, thinking about the journey that had brought me from that Christmas Eve confrontation to this moment of professional recognition. Academic integrity is not just about individual honest behavior, I replied. It is about protecting institutions that serve the public interest. When we allow fraud to continue because it involves people we love, we become complicit in systems that harm everyone who depends on genuine expertise and legitimate credentials. I paused, looking directly at the dean who had asked the question. "The personal costs of exposing fraud are real and significant," I continued. "But the costs of enabling fraud are ultimately much higher both for the individuals involved and for society as a whole. My family relationships were damaged by Tyler's choices, not by my decision to report them. Healing was only possible after we stopped protecting lies and started building on truth." After the presentation, Professor Chen approached me with a smile that conveyed both professional pride and personal affection. "Delilah," she said, "the National Science Foundation has approved funding for your proposal to study academic fraud prevention across 50 major universities. You will be leading a team of researchers who will develop new detection systems and policy recommendations. This work could change how higher education handles integrity issues nationwide." As I walked across Georgetown's campus that evening, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that Christmas Eve when I agreed to my family's ultimatum. The decision to pack my belongings and transfer to Georgetown had required enormous faith that truth would ultimately prevail over manipulation and privilege. That faith had been justified in ways I could never have anticipated. Tyler had learned to build his life on honest work rather than stolen achievements. Our parents had confronted the favoritism and enabling behaviors that had damaged our family for decades. Our father had found meaningful work that aligned with justice rather than profit. Our mother had developed genuine appreciation for my accomplishments rather than obligatory recognition. Most importantly, I had discovered that standing up for integrity, even when it costs everything you thought you wanted, leads to opportunities and relationships that are far more valuable than anything built on compromise and deception. The Georgetown campus was quiet as evening fell, but the buildings were filled with students and faculty who were pursuing knowledge through honest inquiry and legitimate research. Working in that environment every day reminded me why academic integrity mattered so much, not just for individual careers but for society's ability to address complex challenges through reliable expertise. As I reached my apartment, I found a text message from Tyler that made me smile. He had been accepted into a master's program in medical device engineering, a field where he could contribute to healthcare without requiring the medical credentials he had lost. His acceptance was based entirely on legitimate undergraduate work and honest interviews about his goals and qualifications. Starting classes in September. His message read, "Nervous but excited to build something real this time. Thank you for giving me the chance to become an honest person." I replied with congratulations and genuine happiness for his fresh start. Tyler's journey toward integrity was far from complete, but his willingness to rebuild his life on a foundation of truth demonstrated that even people who had made serious ethical mistakes could change if they faced the consequences honestly. Before heading inside to prepare for the next day's research meetings, I paused to call our mother and share news about the National Science Foundation grant. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic, filled with questions about my research and expressions of pride that felt completely genuine. "I am learning so much about your field," she said during our conversation. "I never understood how important academic integrity was to protecting public trust and expertise. Your work is not just about preventing cheating. It is about ensuring that people in critical professions actually have the knowledge and skills their credentials represent." Our relationship had evolved into something I had never experienced before: genuine mutual respect based on shared values rather than family obligation. Our mother's transformation from enabling Tyler's fraud to supporting my integrity work had required her to examine and change patterns of behavior that had persisted for decades. As I ended the call and headed upstairs to my apartment, I felt profound gratitude for the courage I had found on that Christmas Eve to refuse the easy path of apologizing for someone else's misconduct. The decision to pack my belongings and transfer to Georgetown had been terrifying, but it had led to exactly the kind of life and work I had always wanted to build. Standing up for truth had cost me the illusion of family harmony, but it had gained me authentic relationships based on honesty and shared values. It had destroyed Tyler's fraudulent career, but it had enabled him to build genuine skills and legitimate accomplishments. It had ended our father's corrupt business practices, but it had directed his talents toward meaningful work that served justice rather than profit. Most importantly, it had taught me that integrity is not just a personal virtue, but a professional responsibility, especially for those of us who work in fields that affect public welfare and safety. Academic fraud in medical education does not just harm individual careers. It threatens the lives of patients who depend on genuine medical expertise. My research was making a real difference in protecting institutional integrity, and the relationships I had built at Georgetown were based on shared commitment to truth rather than convenience or family loyalty. The work was challenging and important, and I woke up every day excited about contributing to something larger than myself. As I settled in for the evening, I reflected on the question that had started this entire journey: was my decision to expose Tyler's fraud worth the personal costs it had required? The answer was unquestionably yes. Truth and integrity had ultimately created opportunities for healing growth and meaningful work that would never have been possible within a system built on deception and enabling. The Christmas Eve when I said all right to my family's ultimatum had been the beginning of the most challenging and rewarding chapter of my life. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to participate in their dysfunction, even when that refusal leads to temporary conflict and permanent change. Thank you for listening to my story about choosing integrity over family pressure and finding the courage to expose fraud even when it involved people I loved. Have you ever faced a situation where doing the right thing required standing up to family members or close friends who were asking you to compromise your values? How did you find the strength to prioritize truth over convenience? And what did you learn about the difference between genuine loyalty and enabling harmful behavior? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it who might be facing similar challenges. Subscribe for more stories about finding courage in difficult family situations and building relationships based on honesty rather than obligation. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing that choosing integrity, even when it costs everything you thought you wanted, ultimately leads to opportunities and relationships that are far more valuable than anything built on compromise and deception. Remember, standing up for what is right is never easy, but it is always worth it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to apologize for someone else's misconduct, even when family pressure makes that refusal feel impossible. Your integrity is worth protecting, and your courage might just give others the opportunity to become honest people too.